All right, lift off and the clock has started. Yes, sir, reading you loud and clear.
Roger roll, Discovery.
Discovery, roger, go from.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February 5, 2020 edition of Space News. This is our first show for the year, and once again, I'm joined by Michael Abdullah and Angela DeGrazia. Tina can't make it tonight, but we'll hope to hear from her next week. And we're all from the Space Association, so let's get into some Australian space news. And congratulations are in order to Kerry Doherty, a member of the Space Association and a well-known Australian space historian. Kerry was awarded an OAM, a Medal of the Order of Australia, in the General Division in the 2020 Australia Day Honours list announced last Monday. Kerry Award was for her service to astronautical history as an independent space historian, curator and writer. Among her many achievements, Kerry was curator of space technology at the Museum of Applied Arts and Sciences, at the Powerhouse Museum in Sydney from 1983 to 2014. She's a member and chair and co-chair of several committees of the International Academy of Astronautics, editor of several volumes of History of Rocketry and Astronautics, proceedings of the Academy's annual symposium on the history of astronautics for the International Astronautical Federation. Other service included lecturer, Department of Space Humanities, International Space University since 2001, member of National Space Society of Australia and the Space Association of Australia. Most recent exhibition, From the Outback to Outer Space, Woomera 1955 to 1980 at the State Library of South Australia in 2017. Author of Australia in Space in 2017, which is an updated edition of Space Australia in 1983. Other awards and recognition include the recipient of the Saknoff Award for Space History 2015, recipient of the Australian Space Pioneer Award, National Space Society of Australia. So, very accomplished and well-deserved, and congratulations to Kerry. And over to you, Angelo.
Okay, well, I'm glad to be back for what's shaping up to be a pretty big year in space. So we'll go straight to US space policy. The House Space Subcommittee advanced a NASA authorisation bill last month whilst acknowledging issues with it. The Space Subcommittee approved the bill on a voice vote after passing several amendments, sending the bill to the full House Science Committee. Members said language in the bill calling for a human return to the moon by 2028 should not be interpreted as a rejection of NASA's Artemis program with a goal of a 2024 human lunar landing, and that nothing in the bill prevents NASA from carrying out that earlier mission. Some members said they had concerns about the bill's language on human lunar lander development and would seek changes as the bill progressed. To the space station. NASA has selected Axiom Space to add a commercial module to the International Space Station. NASA said the Houston-based company would have access to a docking port on the station's Node 2 module and will begin negotiations with the company on a 5-year contract for use of the port. Axiom expects to launch a module in the second half of 2024 and eventually plans to add a series of modules to the station for research and other applications. The modules would separate from the International Space Station at the end of the station's life to form the core of a commercial station. Now to Commercial Crew Program. SpaceX successfully carried out an in-flight abort test of its Crew Dragon spacecraft last month. A Falcon 9 carrying the spacecraft lifted off from the Kennedy Space Center, and 84 seconds later, the spacecraft fired its Super Draco thrusters to pull away from the rocket, simulating a launch abort. The spacecraft splashed down in the Atlantic about 9 minutes after liftoff. The test was one of the last major ones for the spacecraft before the Demonstration 2 crewed test flight to the International Space Station that may take place in the second quarter of this year. NASA will decide in the next few weeks whether to extend the Demonstration 2 mission. The flight, with NASA astronauts Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley on board, is currently intended to be only a short duration one. But the agency is studying whether to extend the mission to increase the crew size on the station which will be down to 3 people, including only 1 American starting in April. Extending the Demo 2 mission would likely delay the launch in order to give the crew more training. Meanwhile, NASA and Boeing are establishing a joint team to investigate the timer anomaly on a December's CST-100 Starliner orbital test flight. NASA said the Joint Independent Investigation Team would spend about 2 months studying the cause of the problem with the spacecraft's mission elapsed timer. The anomaly led to the mission being shortened and a docking with the International Space Station cancelled. Okay, over to you, Mike.
Thank you, Angelo, and let's turn to NASA news. NASA graduated its latest class of astronauts last month. The group of 11 astronauts, plus 2 from the Canadian Space Agency, completed 2 years of training and are now eligible for flight assignments. NASA declared these astronauts to be the first class in the Artemis generation, with the possibility of going on missions to the Moon. Turning to NASA's planetary and space science programs, NASA's Parker Solar Probe took one step closer to the Sun last week when it executed its 4th flyby of our star. The probe broke its own record for the closest a spacecraft has come to the Sun, within 18.6 million kilometres. And turning to India, the Indian Space Agency ISRO has made a lunar landing and human spaceflights top priorities. ISRO head K. Sivan started the year by announcing India would attempt a second lunar landing. Sivan told a New Year's Day press briefing that the Chandrayaan-3 lunar lander mission, along with the human spaceflight program, would be top priorities for ISRO in 2020, although neither may fly until next year. 4 Indian Air Force pilots are in training for the human space program, expected to launch no earlier than late 2021. And back to you, Angelo.
Okay, let's talk commercial space, SpaceX. SpaceX has plans to develop a vertical integration building to support launches of some national security payloads. The movable tower would be built at the Kennedy Space Center's Launch Complex 39A, surrounding a Falcon 9 or Falcon Heavy on the pad to allow crews to install payloads. SpaceX typically integrates payloads horizontally, then rolls the rocket to the pad and raises it to the vertical position. But some national security payloads, particularly reconnaissance satellites, require vertical integration, and the ability to do so is part of the requirements for the next round of the military launch competition.
All right, well, that's a wrap up for this week's news. But what we thought we'd do now is take a snapshot look at the year ahead. So we've got 20 stories for 2020 to keep an eye on over this calendar year. So the first one is the Solar Orbiter, a joint mission of NASA and the European Space Agency, and it's scheduled to lift off from Cape Canaveral Air Force Station on February 7th. The spacecraft is expected to get as close as 0.28 astronomical units to the Sun, which is well within the orbit of Mercury, to better study how the Sun works. 1 astronomical unit is the distance between the Sun and the Earth. This mission is expected to last 7 years. And then the first launch of a small satellite launch vehicle, or SSLV, a new rocket from the Indian Space Research Centre ISRO, is expected sometime in early 2020, once again possibly February. The goal is to create a small launcher that can launch frequently and with a few people to save on operational costs and complications. This year, it will launch its first commercial mission with 4 Earth observation satellites for Black Sky Global. And moving to the next, SpaceX has kicked off 2020 with launches of another 2 batches of Starlink satellites, which are meant to provide global broadband internet connectivity. Then, every 2 weeks afterwards, SpaceX will launch 60 Starlink internet satellites at a time. Starlink may eventually comprise as many as 42,000 individual vehicles circling the Earth. SpaceX has said the vehicles are equipped with sensors to dodge collisions, but observers still worry about orbital debris. The company is also planning to coat these satellites in anti-reflective stuff to ease worries about these large constellation interfering with astronomical observations. And it's over to Angelo.
Okay, the fourth item to look out for. SpaceX isn't the only company trying to establish a pervasive network of internet satellites. A company called OneWeb has already launched 6 test satellites and plans to send up to 34 spacecraft into orbit. OneWeb's immediate goal is to launch 650 satellites in its planned mega constellation. So far, OneWeb has 3 launches planned for 2020, though it may launch more than 30 at a time about once a month. Number 5. Firefly Aerospace is another small satellite company expected to make a launch debut this year. Firefly is developing the Alpha rocket to launch payloads of up to 1,000 kilograms to low Earth orbit. The rocket stands 29 metres tall and will launch from a dedicated Firefly pad at Vandenberg Air Force Base in California. Firefly plans to launch the rocket's first test flight in April 2020, with a second flight to follow by June if all goes according to plan. Items 6 and 7. SpaceX's Crew Dragon and Boeing Starliner are expected to take the first astronauts to space in the coming year, although exact launch dates have not yet been announced. And if you remember, this is the first time since 2011 that astronauts have actually or will actually lift off from US soil. All right, items 8, 9, 10 and 11. On July 17, NASA will launch its long-awaited Mars 2020 rover to explore the possible sites of ancient habitability, while the European Space Agency and Russia plan to do the same with their ExoMars Rosalind Franklin rover on July 25th. The United Arab Emirates plans its first mission, the Hope Mars mission, which will launch from Japan. The Hope Mars orbiter will be the Arab world's first planetary science mission. The probe will study Mars' atmosphere, monitoring how it interacts with the solar wind and tracking its loss of hydrogen and oxygen. China also plans a lander and a small rover for Mars. Back to you, Mike.
Okay, item 12. OSIRIS-REx will collect a sample of dust from asteroid Bennu in August. To execute the sample-grabbing manoeuvre, the spacecraft will get extremely close to the surface and extend an arm to touch the asteroid for about 5 seconds. The head of that tool will blow nitrogen gas to help capture dust and pebbles. After the sample is collected, OSIRIS-REx will leave Bennu in 2021 and arrive back on Earth with the asteroid dust in 2023. Number 13. China's space agency is expected to launch its next moon mission called Chang'e 5 sometime in 2020. The country wants to send a sample of the moon back to Earth for analysis, following on from its highly successful Chang'e 4 mission that put a lander and a rover safely on the far side of the moon. If Chang'e 5 succeeds, it will be the first mission to bring back samples from the moon since the last Apollo mission in 1972. Number 14. The US Air Force is expected to once again launch the mysterious X-37B spaceplane, also known as the Orbital Test Vehicle, sometime this year. This will be the 6th mission of the uncrewed vehicle, which can stay in space for up to a year at a time to perform its secret work. In 2019, one of the Air Force's 2 known X-37 spacecraft returned to Earth after a record-breaking 780-day flight. That's more than 2 years in space. Number 15. Virgin Galactic is expected to begin launching space tourists with paying passengers aboard. Those flights, potentially slated for mid-year, will launch passengers from Spaceport America in New Mexico, the home of Virgin Galactic's Spaceship Two fleet, and its carrier aircraft White Knight 2. Virgin Galactic is offering suborbital space flights for passengers at $250,000 per ticket. The company is building a second Spaceship Two spacecraft. Both vehicles can carry up to 8 people, 2 pilots and 6 passengers. And number 16, Blue Origin, the private space company founded by Amazon billionaire Jeff Bezos, launched 3 flights of its new Shepard spacecraft in 2019, most recently on December 11, and is on track to make the leap into human spaceflight in 2020. To date, Blue Origin has flown 12 new Shepard missions, with the last 6 flying on the same booster and capsule. While Blue Origin will fly passengers on suborbital trips, it has not revealed how much a seat will cost, but has said the company needs a couple of more flights to be ready for crewed missions. And back to Angelo.
Okay, number 17. Virgin Orbit aims to begin orbital launches during the year. Virgin Orbit is a small satellite launch company that aims to launch payloads into orbit using Launcher 1. The rocket is an air-launched booster carried into launch position by a modified Boeing 747 jumbo jet called Cosmic Girl. The first launch from Virgin Orbit is expected to take off from California's Mojave Air and Space Port and launch from a position over the Pacific Ocean. Back to you, Pete.
Thanks, Angelo. Number 18 we're up to. Hayabusa 2 returns to Earth with rock samples from the asteroid Ryugu in late 2020. Back in April 2019, Japan's Hayabusa 2 probe blasted the asteroid with a copper plate and a box of explosives in order to loosen rocks and expose material under the surface. Then it landed on the asteroid's surface in July to collect samples of the space rock. Hayabusa 2 is on its way back to Earth and should arrive in Australia in November or December. Number 19. SpaceX is also expected to continue development work on its Starship Mark III prototype for deep space missions and could launch its first Starship into orbit during 2020. SpaceX CEO Elon Musk said in September last year the company may launch a new Starship into orbit in as little as 6 months. However, that's before the company accidentally blew the top off its Starship Mark I prototype during a refueling test in November. Still, the company is moving quickly to convert its developing launch site in Boca Chica, Texas, to a fully fledged private spaceport. And item number 20, some more potential SpaceX deliberate disasters. We're going to hear from SpaceX CEO Elon Musk. Thanks, and we'll speak to you all next week.